We've been fighting human trafficking now for 30, almost 31 years domestically. And we do it in different ways. So there's always the awareness, there's always the training, there's always the work to help survivors once they're recovered for their healing process to get them into a safe home. And then there's policy and legislation. And I serve as the director of policy for Yakabuins Ministries. And as I was saying about my niece's story, she was trafficked in the United States exclusively. Now, I know that a lot of us think that human trafficking is somebody gets snatched up, right? And they're kidnapped and they're taken away, they're chained to a radiator or put in a cage. And yes, that does happen, but that literally is about 1 to 1.5% of the time. Exploitation and trafficking look a lot like my niece's story. Her story began in school where she was groomed by a teacher. She had well, they call it inappropriate relationship, but let's be clear, she was raped by her teacher. And then she ended up through season and time, she ended up getting pregnant. And then she moved out of my sister's home and then had a child. And then her trafficker was the father of her child. And then she progressed into 15 years of us not knowing where she was. Now, there is a belief in these situations where because drugs are being utilized on these victims, that, oh, well, she might have just had a drug problem, or, oh, she may have just been making bad decisions. Well, absolutely, she was making bad decisions. And that bad decision was at the entry point, which in her case was at school, she didn't tell anybody. It didn't occur to her to tell anybody what was going on because our culture has been hypersexualized. Because culturally, in school, she was being indoctrinated and seeing all of this hypersexual content, access to the internet, access to social media. And in her mind, she thought that was normal and natural. So it didn't occur to her that she was being trafficked. And here's what's important is that trafficking is, in the legal sense of the term, is when there's force, fraud, or coercion used to have people, adults, make these decisions. And you had said earlier about prostitution as a prime example. And we know that prostitution, like 99% of women that are being prostituted and men, it's generally against their will. Somebody else has groomed them into believing this is normal and natural. But with children, we don't have to prove that force, fraud, and coercion. So with children, we have to look at what point are they being indoctrinated? At what point are they being groomed? In my niece's case, at school, with the books that were in school, with the curriculum that she was being taught, with other older boys and older schoolmates having her make really poor decisions. And this is happening all across this country. And parents out there, everybody has to understand that the new trafficker today is this phone. The phone is isolating. The phone is causing our children to get onto social media thinking that this is normal behavior, actually being targeted by predators. We know that according to the FBI, there's over 750,000 predators online every minute of every day accessing our loved ones. So this isn't something that is just a situation in maybe a particular demographic or a particular environment or neighborhood. This is across the nation. There are statistics out there telling us today that in 1 out of every 4 children, minors, are being propositioned for sex online before the age of 13. Another interesting statistic is that the average age that children are accessing pornography is the age of 8 years old. And what happens when the brain, an immature brain, sees this content, there's a chemical change that happens inside of the brain. And instantly, children are becoming addicted to these images. Because remember, before, pornography was maybe held in a Playboy magazine, right? Where you would have to
Tammy, Tammy, unmute yourself, please.
Have I been muted the whole time?
No, you were not. It was just for a moment.
Interesting. Okay. So, I think I was on pornography.
Yeah.
Okay. So with pornography, we've really made some changes recently in legislation. So as the director of policy, one of the things that we do at our ministry is we understand and we do gap analysis on where children being introduced to these things and how can we make the biggest impact possible in policy. And so something that we did this year here in Texas, which I encourage you guys to look into as well. I know that Tennessee is looking into this. I've got Georgia, Ohio, Indiana, states across the nation, is that we're finding that in schools, just like with my niece, in schools, we have got a high number of sexual misconduct complaints against teachers, right? Because one of the things that predators need is proximity. So in Texas, I did a public information request. We were able to access over 6,888 sexual misconduct complaints against teachers that in Texas went uninvestigated. So here parents are thinking across this great state that their kids are safe in school. They weren't. These misconduct complaints simply went uninvestigated and ignored. And we believe that that's obviously, that's a travesty. And so we started looking into what happens in schools when there's a complaint against a teacher. And what we found in Texas is that because those sexual misconduct complaints went to the Texas Education Agency, the TEA, and not to law enforcement, that we had to do something different in order to fortify and protect our kiddos. So we were able to come up with legislation that pierces the sovereign immunity in order for a parent to be able to sue a school district if in fact there's a sexual misconduct complaint against a teacher that goes hidden or unanswered, uninvestigated. Now that goes back to empowering the parents and keeping accountability inside of our school systems. Most people don't know that there's a sovereign immunity around school districts that you cannot be sued in most cases, except now. Now, other states across the nation are moving towards this because we need to make sure that our kids are being protected. So that's one instance of one bill in Texas that we got across the finish line and is now going across this great nation. Another really important bill, because I did mention the obscenity that's in schools, the dirty books in schools that we've all seen across this nation of families going to the school boards and them getting kicked out or removed. And it's problematic if our content isn't appropriate for our kids. We want age appropriate content. So another really key bill that we have had great success here in Texas this legislative session was to remove the obscenity exemption. Now, what does that mean? The way that this content was able to break into our school systems is that our schools had an exemption that I believe all but 6 states adopted back in like the 70s, 1970, 71. And that was intended in order to teach health class, right? In order to teach what an ovary is, they felt that they needed to pass this law so that that's not considered obscene in school, that they could teach health. That has been taken and completely bastardized to where all these dirty books, these inappropriate books that have sex acts in books that are in our elementary schools. So that's the excuse they use. Well, what we've been able to do is to repeal the obscenity exemption, cut the head off the snake, and say no. If a book is inappropriate to show a child after school, off school premise, if that book is considered harmful content to a child and would be considered a felony here in Texas, but in school it's appropriate because of this exemption, that's unacceptable. So we were able to repeal the obscenity exemption in the great state of Texas, and there's other states across this nation that are doing the same thing. Another really key component that we're finding for children is back to the pornography issue. Do you know that we are finally getting states to acknowledge that pornography is a public health hazard. That has happened, I think, in about 15 states. And it's happening more and more states because we have to understand what happens chemically in the brain when children, an immature brain, sees that particular content. And because this is happening, right, we've got 54 million kids in public schools. We have a massive amount of problems with kids accessing pornography. So first we have to understand that's the entryway, right, into this moral decline. The other thing we get to look at is a bill that happened, which we're really proud of here in Texas, HB 1181. And you may have heard about it. It's the age verification bill, because we believe just as you have to show ID to get alcohol, which is a controlled substance, you should have to show your ID to access pornography, to make sure as a safeguard to protect our kids so they don't make the same mistakes that my niece made, thinking that that was normal behavior. So the age verification bill, there was a huge Supreme Court case recently, Paxton versus the Free Speech Coalition, where it upheld Texas's right to require age verification for porn websites. All that means is that if there's a certain amount of porn on a website, then the user, the adult, needs to upload their ID. And that will help protect our kids from accessing that pornography. So as you can see, there's like this progression of, we certainly want adults to be able to make their own choices, but we want to fortify and protect our kids from accessing content that could permanently change the chemistry of their brain and permanently destroy their lives if they get access too young. So that's another really key component. Now, I know that some of this might be really heady. Some of you today joining us, or this is like complicated. I hope that we're able to break the policy down in a way that's manageable and that is a bite-sized piece, so you can have hope that there is hope, right? That our country is beginning to make the necessary changes to protect our children. Now, I can't let this go much longer without kind of addressing like the big elephant in the room, which is like the P. Diddy case, right? Or the Epstein case. So we're hearing a lot about human trafficking out there, and maybe you don't see or hear anything being done about it as far as court cases. I think this is critical to mention because when we talk about human trafficking, it's complex, right? When you prosecute human trafficking, it's complex. And when it happens to adults, remember earlier on, I said that there's the force, fraud, and coercion that you have to prove. That's basically saying that you've got to get inside the perpetrator's mind and inside the survivor's mind. And that's very complicated to prove, because in the cases of human trafficking and sexual crime, it's very, very difficult to cross-examine. It's very difficult to be able to have somebody show up in court and not have them re-traumatized. So something else that we have seen as a gap in our society that you can also help us fortify is a federal human trafficking court. This would be something very specific that they would only prosecute human trafficking crimes. And if we can get our federal government to create a designated court that is trained in these complex situations, this will really change the face and the hope for our survivors. Because so oftentimes a survivor does not want to testify. They don't want to go to court because they don't ever see it changing, or they're too afraid. Like my niece, her traffickers were the fathers of her children. She had 6 children while she was being trafficked, and she had 3 different fathers. And so she was under threat that they would hurt or harm those children. But what if there was a court that was specialized and trained, that the judges really understood this particular crime? The prosecutors would have training. The bailiffs would have special training, where now, instead of a case going to court, and because you couldn't prove the human trafficking piece, it's dropped, we would now have a court equipped to take on these complex cases in a manner that the survivors would be able to get justice. And we have to be able to make that incremental change. Now, I think this is a really, really meaningful, important time for us to have these conversations together. But I also want to encourage you that today's visit, we want to empower you with an action step, a call to action, not just sit and talk about the problem, but to say you can actually do something about it. And I know that a lot of us can get frustrated with how slow progress happens. But I want to say today that because of the rampant change we're seeing legislatively, even in very conservative and liberal states, we can protect these kids. And how we can do that, at least legislatively, is be engaged. Doing things like tonight, reaching out, participating in these town halls. The other thing you can certainly do at minimum is reach out to your elected officials, your local elected officials. Let them know that you support all measures to protect children. You support all measures to stop sexualizing children. And inside of their offices, their legislative director, the elected official, they'll know what bills that applies to. So if you just broaden that scope, we don't expect you to all have all the answers and be able to read legislation and understand the implications of it, but just reach out. And not only during session, but I encourage you to build that relationship with your elected officials. I send out weekly communication and monthly communication. And so that when the time is right, legislatively, when there are bills before committees, that they will listen. So I just really would encourage you, whether you prefer to make a phone call, whether you prefer to send a quick email, just saying, please support human trafficking bills that are survivor focused, that will ensure our kids are protected, and that will really make a difference in our state. Because I am here to say, I don't want any family to ever have to go through the difficult measures that we and my family had to go through because of my niece's situation. And I know that we're going to kind of segue into law enforcement. And I just want to share briefly the story about our situation, that when my niece went missing at 13, our local law enforcement only was able to look for her for 6 months. And after that, they considered her a runaway. And so my husband and I, we ended up having to do the work for those 15 years. We ended up having to get our PI license so that we could investigate differently, because our local law enforcement simply didn't have the capability, they didn't have the bandwidth. And after a particular age, they just considered them a runaway. So having to do that as a family member really is what inspired me to shift gears in my career. And instead of doing policy for financial services, really commit my time, talent, and treasure working with Jacob Boon's ministries to find a way to ensure that other families will not have to struggle. If you are a family out there that has a loved one in the same situation, I would really encourage you, please, please don't stop. Continue to look. And our next speaker will speak very specifically into what it is that local law enforcement can do, what they're looking at as a problem, what are the barriers, and how maybe collectively together we can find real solutions for this situation where we're having a problem nationwide. So with that, I really appreciate your time today. And if you have any questions or any additional information that you'd like from me, please feel free to email me at Tammy, T-A-M-I, actually, no, do TBR at helpjbm.org. Thanks so much. And thank you for having me.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Tammy. That was amazing. We're trying to get the chat room open where you can ask questions. And you can send those questions in. At the end, you'll be able to unmute yourself. I want to share this with you as we go to Mr. George Wilson. The disaster that has happened in our nation is greatly connected to Christians not being involved. You know, there's this thing about we're praying, but we're not acting, and prayer should not lead to silence in the face of injustice, in the face of things that are contrary to the tenets of our faith. So I want to share a scripture with you because it means something to me. It is Jeremiah 29:7. And it simply says, seek peace and well-being for the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its peace or well-being, you will have peace. That's the amplified version of that. But that's one of the scriptures that got me involved. When it goes well in the place where the church is at, then the church, it also goes well for the church. So we want to make sure that our faith does not lead us to silence. You know, we pray and I'm praying. Well, praying should lead to doing. At least that's the way it happened when I read the Bible. That's the way it appears to have happened for me, is that when men prayed, then men did, because God responds to prayer, and usually with an instruction. With that, I want to just jump real fast. Everybody stay engaged because I will figure out how to get this open for you at the end if we can't open the chat. Mr. George Wilson.
It is not letting me undo my video. It says that.
Okay. We're gonna make that happen right now. Okay. You go ahead. I will figure out how to get you in here.
All right. You want me to go and start talking then?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, first, I just want to say thank you to everyone for choosing to take your time out of your evening. There's many other things you probably could be doing right now, just like watching Monday Night Football and other things. And you're taking time away from your family to learn more about this important topic. So I just really commend you and I thank you again. A little bit about myself. I'm George Wilson. I have 21 years of law enforcement experience. The majority of that time has been spent investigating internet crimes against children, domestic violence, human trafficking cases, and juvenile cases overall. I've had a wide variety of opportunities throughout the years to do different kinds of cases, and those cases have taught me many, many things, which have brought us here today. I'm also appointed to the North Carolina Domestic Violence Commission for the state of North Carolina, which allows me the opportunity to work statewide with different organizations in domestic violence. And I find that important because there is so much correlation between domestic violence and human trafficking. Prior to getting into law enforcement, I worked at an organization called Youth for Christ. That gave me the opportunity to work with at-risk children. I really got to see the struggles before getting into law enforcement that children went through. Unfortunately, I was losing a lot of children to different variety of topics, but mainly losing them. Hold on, let me start my video. All right, hopefully that works. Losing them to bad influences within their environment, and it frustrated me greatly. And I felt like I had to find a way to make a better impact, which then led me to going into law enforcement. Both those jobs have taught me that the system is broken. And I also understand that I'm part of the system when I say that. And so I wanted to find a different way to make a better impact on children, on survivors, and on victims and overall with the system. That allowed me to move into my current role, which is a program director for Conservatives for Criminal Justice Reform. I'm still law enforcement, I'm part-time, I'm still sworn, but moving into this new role gave me an opportunity to kind of speak out, because sometimes in law enforcement, you have to kind of mute what you say and what you do for a variety of reasons. And I found myself, just like Representative said, you want to find a way to do better. You want to be a voice. And so I wanted to find a way to be able to just speak out better and help people better understand what was going on. Because while there's great things going on, there's also some bad things going on within the system. And so I just wanted to be able to hold all those parts accountable. And I also want to be able to go to representatives and people in the community and say, hey, this is what's working. This isn't what's working. We need to look at this differently. We need to do this better. We need to look at what this nonprofit's doing and expand on it. And so through all those experiences, it just really gave me an opportunity to come to the table sometimes and say, hey, I have no vested interest in any of this other than the fact that I've been a part of it, I've experienced it, and I work in it. And I want to share with you what's working and what's not working. And that's what led me to invite a group of legislators who I knew had a heart for survivors, for victims, and for this topic to go to Dallas. And luckily, Mercury One Yaku were kind enough to open their arms to us, come out there. Tammy, the other Tammy Yaku, they're experts at what they do. I've leaned on them for years for different cases for survivor resources, and they've been a partner with me, and they're a very strong partner. And so I wanted the opportunity for these incredible representatives who were willing to step out and say, I want to learn more, that I care beyond just people coming in my office and speaking with me. And so we went out there and we had some impactful and incredible discussions. And I really commend every legislator that went for doing that, because that is a risk that they took. So talking about my past and my current and everything that I've learned, I understand this is a very broad topic. And especially when you talk about law enforcement, there's so many different avenues we could go down tonight. So I'm sure there's going to be something that you have questions about, something you wish I would have touched on, and I apologize in advance. It's very hard with this being such a broad topic and so many different avenues to go down to know exactly what you want to hear and to touch on everything. So first, a lot of people will ask me, what's the difference between federal players are doing and what local players are doing? Well, luckily, when it comes to things like internet crimes against children and human trafficking, the federal resources and your state and local resources work very well together. HSI, Homeland Security, has really taken the lead in these areas. They have really championed this topic, and they've kind of taken the lead as the enforcement agency in human trafficking. We also have the FBI Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. You're going to hear a lot of times, especially when I speak, I kind of interchange those things because they are so closely related. They are different, but a majority of how we investigate it, what happens, how we get tips are so closely related in both of those. So I'll just say that out front now. Sometimes you'll hear me interchange those. And then that trickles down to your local law enforcement. Sometimes we get tips from our federal partners, we get tips from the community, and then depending on where you live, it'll be the sheriff's office, it could be your local police department, or it could be a task force. Here in North Carolina, we have a new task force called the Invictus Task Force. I know those gentlemen. I know Ray very well. They're doing great work. And what they are they're a group of individuals who came together to combat this. And it's made of multiple federal, state, local sheriffs, and police departments. And they're doing incredible work. And so those partners come together and they take the tips and the information, and there's power in working together. I can only do so much. Another organization can only do so much, but together we can do twice as much in half the time, and that helps everyone involved. With that in mind, I'll kind of move into what I think helps law enforcement. And the first thing I tell people all the time, we have to talk about the myths and the realities of what's going on with this, because unfortunately, Hollywood, TV, music, they have really changed people's perspective or what they think this crime should look like. Like other speakers were saying, it's not Hollywood. It's not people kicking in the door, throwing someone in a van and taking off with them. It's people in your community. It's pastors, unfortunately. It's teachers. It's your next door neighbor. So what I really ask people is, please take all your preconceived notions that you have about what you think this topic looks like, what you think an offender may look like, what you think a victim or a survivor may look like, and just set that aside for a little while. Okay. Let's have a real conversation. Let's remove all those barriers, because what happens is when we start thinking about what we think it should look like, we start, someone's unmuted. We have a really bad echo. So what happens is when you come in with preconceived notions, you have tunnel vision. You're looking for what you think it should look like. And unfortunately, that means if we're only looking for certain things, we're missing a lot of other things that could be indicators and signs for us. And that's not just the public in general, that's law enforcement too, which leads me into my next point, which is training. We have to train law enforcement better. We have to train our community partners better, and we have to train the public better. And that's for several different reasons. Mainly, like I just said, it's because unfortunately we do have preconceived notions, and we need to change those, because as we change those, we're going to start discovering more things within our communities and all around us. And I tell people also, you have to remember something. We see what's going on in this topic as being absolutely horrible, but then you have to think sometimes people are choosing or not choosing. Let me rephrase that. This is a statement I use to people all the time. Children are not running to something, they're running from something. So if children are leaving home, running away from home and hitting the streets, and they see the streets and other lifestyles as better than home, we have to ask ourselves, what are they really like? How bad is home? So it's multifaceted. You have to peel those layers back, and you have to learn to start asking important questions. And when law enforcement sees children on the street, or when teachers see children come to the school and they're acting different, we have to start asking better questions, more in-depth questions. But unfortunately, a lot of times people don't know what to ask, and that's where training comes into play. It is extremely important for us to take all our community partners and do things like what we're doing tonight and train them. Say, this is what to look for. This is the questions you need to ask. Why do you need to ask these type of questions? A great example I can give you is I had a case where I had done some education as a school resource officer with the staff at my school. And through that, I had a teacher come to me and she said, "You have to come to the front office." And I said, "Okay." So I go to the front office, and a new student had just registered in our school. And that student had been at 11 different schools in 2.5 years. That's a lot of schools in a very short amount of time. And the teacher told me, "I remember you telling me that students who bounce around a lot, that's a red flag for problems at home." She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she remembered this is a warning sign. And so we started doing some investigation, and that was a case they ended up where the little girl had been sold by her father. And every time local law enforcement would get on his trail or start asking questions, he would up and move. And so through that special training that we did with our staff, we were able to rescue a child. That also comes into our law enforcement officers. One thing we see today in law enforcement, unfortunately, due to the climate, is that your seasoned officers are leaving, and that leaves a big gap, and it leaves a lot of very young officers on our streets. But it also means that they have young supervisors. So what we've seen in this profession is as the experienced and more seasoned officers leave, this gap forms. That knowledge leaves with them, that understanding leaves with them. And so then we have younger officers who come in through no fault of their own, and we have younger people leading younger officers. I think the last statistic I saw was in the United States, the average years of experience on patrol in the United States now for law enforcement is like 2.5 years. When I first started 21 years ago, I think the average experience on patrol was like 7.5 years. That's a big gap. That's a lot of knowledge lost. And so what happens is we're having younger officers who stop a car and they hear a story and they say something's not quite right there. Why is this 45-year-old person driving around with this what appears to be 15, 16-year-old, but they're telling me they're 18 years old, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning. The problem is if the officers don't know how to articulate this, they may just take the story and let it go on. So what we have to do is we have to invest in training to our officers and say, okay, you can ask these questions. You can start saying something doesn't fit here. They have to learn how to articulate it. They have to learn how to take the totality of the circumstances and start asking smart questions that legally will allow them to extend that traffic stop. And then they have to be able to take that information and pass it on to the appropriate people within the community, whether it's nonprofits, whether it's DSS, Department of Social Services, or other things like that. That also goes into our teachers, our clergies, nurses, emergency room staff, all those things. Every one of these people come in contact with survivors, victims, children in the community. And if we can empower them with more knowledge and more information, they're going to make better decisions that will save lives in the long run. The other thing we have to look at is what vulnerabilities and risk factors are there in our communities around us. Look around. We have runaway, we have foster children. What type of immigration populations do you have? What's your addiction and poverty levels in your communities? These are all things that impact this topic. The more, unfortunately, addiction we see, you're going to have people resorting to different things to support that habit. People use addiction as a method of control. Just like Tammy was talking about, her niece had a baby. Well, one thing that I learned and I saw in trafficking is that a trafficker will have a child with a survivor or victim. Why does that matter? Because when someone calls us law enforcement out to the scene and they say, "Well, he took my child from me," the first question is, who's the father? Well, he's the father. Okay. That means that law enforcement hands is tied. They can't say, "Give me that child," because unless there's a custody agreement in place, both parties have a right to that child. But what can happen is if we can better train officers that this is a method that traffickers use to influence and hold extreme power over someone. There's no greater power and control method than someone's child, hanging that child over them. And what I've seen happen is traffickers will say, "The child is with my aunt." Well, the young lady doesn't know where the aunt lives. And the trafficker says, "If you want to see the child this weekend, you need to make X amount of dollars in the next week." And then that young lady tries to make that goal. And they say, "Well, I fed you, I clothed you, I put a roof over your head." And then they don't get to see that child. And then they call law enforcement. Well, if we have officers who are willing to listen and to see that something's not quite right, and they're educated that this is a method that is used, they can start asking different questions. They can start articulating why they're going to spend more time on this call and why they're going to go down different avenues to try to help this young lady. And that it's not just a domestic incident that they're going to clear, not write a report on. And that's the other thing. We have to start documenting this because I think Tammy would agree. We need to document this history. We need law enforcement to start documenting it. It's just not a 911 call. It's just not people who are disagreeing. These are things that need to be documented so we can start building good cases. And that also means that making referrals to DSS and your local nonprofits. We also have to teach people, again, victims do not behave the way we think they should behave. And that's for a multitude of reasons. No one chooses this lifestyle. No one wakes up in the morning and says, this is what I want to do every day. And unfortunately, I think some people, when they see that they don't have handcuffs on them and they're not tied to a radiator, like Tammy said, that they think this person's choosing this lifestyle. And that's not true. There's other things going on. The power and control wheel that we used to see in domestic violence, we have now adapted and come over to human trafficking. Exploitation, control, things like that are all different things that suspects and traffickers use to keep people. And again, we have to think, what are people running from to this is where they're at now? And we have to change how the community perceives these things, including even our legislators. I think one really powerful thing is that I have the opportunity to go and tell these stories to legislators and let them understand these survivors are incredible people. Just like I said, get rid of your preconceived notions. You would not believe the incredible things that these survivors do to make it day to day. They're stronger than I could ever be. But unfortunately, sometimes we miss that because we go in with such a mindset that drugs and violence and criminal history makes them a bad person. And that's not true. Unfortunately, trafficking is this weird world where things collide all together. We see alcohol, we see drugs, we see all sorts of things, and our victims get these criminal histories, and then they walk in and people see their criminal histories instead of seeing that they're incredible survivors. And I really think that's one thing that I truly enjoy about my job now, is that I have the opportunity to go in and help legislators understand that these are incredible survivors. They're incredible people. They're not their past. They're not their criminal histories. And I also take that same aspect into law enforcement and to other partners within the community. When you see that person walk in through the door and they're dirty and maybe they're addicted and they're going through withdrawals, don't see them as a drug addict. See them as an incredible survivor who did incredible things just to make it to the point to be in front of you. So don't put them down. Don't look down on them. Don't judge them. Help them where they're at. Meet them where they're at and help them change their life to where one day they become this incredible success story. Sorry, I kind of got off on a tangent there. Law enforcement's response to trafficking has really changed over the years, and it will continue to change as we learn more, we become more educated, and we learn how to partner with our community resources and our nonprofits, like what you're going to hear from right after me, Simon. If we can learn how to work as a team, it's not us versus them. It's not nonprofits doing their work. It's not law enforcement doing their work. It's not prosecutors doing their work. And it's not doctors and hospital staff doing their work or social services. If we can learn to all come together as a team and work for these victims and for these survivors. And when I mean by for them, we are there to serve them. We are there to help them. We are not there to judge them. And if the community can also start seeing it like that, we'll see mountains starting to move. And so it is so important that law enforcement learns to adapt how they investigate, how they handle these cases, and we start seeing these people for the incredible people they are, the resourcefulness they have. I tell my coworkers all the time, if we as law enforcement were half as resourceful as the survivors that I've dealt with over the years, it would change the game of law enforcement and how we respond and how we handle crime within our communities. I can only hope to be half as resourceful and incredible of the victims that I've dealt with throughout my career. I know I got a little off topic there. I'm sorry. I'm pretty passionate about helping victims, helping survivors, helping people understand that they are not their past. They are not their criminal history. They're incredible people. They are people who deserve to be heard and to be listened to. And that honestly, our community owes so much to them, because unfortunately, sometimes they fall through the cracks for multiple reasons, including law enforcement. Unfortunately, we have done a poor job in our profession responding sometimes to the smaller crimes that we could have headed off to stop the larger crimes. But thank goodness, our profession has started to learn that we were missing those things, and we're starting to train better. We're starting to respond differently to these calls of service and these crimes, to where we're starting to slowly but surely get ahead of the game, or at least become even with the game. And that way we can do better for these victims and we can do better for the communities that we serve.
Hey, excellent, excellent. So, we have a few questions. They're starting to come in. We want to take them at the end. Maybe you guys can ask. We're going to have Tammy, George, and now you're getting ready to meet Simon, who runs a local nonprofit called the Lantern Project. Phenomenal work. You were kind of like a myth for me for a couple of years, because he's the guy who everybody knows but nobody sees because he's busy doing the work. He and his wife. It's a good thing happening here. As you can hear, we have the legislative side, the law enforcement side. Now let's hear about the nonprofits and how all of these things can work together. because to hit on what George said, I haven't met a single person that thinks this is okay. I've met a lot of people who can't imagine it. I've met a lot of people who they're simply not even aware. And I've met some cowards who they're just afraid to get involved. So I'm thankful for some of our local heroes, mountains of faith like Simon. And go ahead, brother. It's all yours.
Awesome, man. I appreciate it. Well, again, I just want to echo everyone and say thank you so much for showing up. Honestly, when I see the numbers in the attendees, I'm blown away because typically for things like this, we don't get people these kind of numbers. So I'm thankful for all of you showing up. So my name is Simon. My wife and I, we run the Lantern Project. It's a 501c3 nonprofit counter trafficking agency. We've been doing this for 15 years now. Right now, we're based in Cabarrus County. We're part of the Cabarrus County Counter Trafficking Task Force. We're also part of the Mecklenburg Task Force, as well as the Demand Reduction Task Force. And as an end-to-end agency, we deal a lot with prevention. So we're the people we show up at schools, we show up at churches, we show up at businesses. Basically, anyone that will listen to us, we will show up and talk to you. We talk to you about what trafficking looks like locally, everything from some of the bigger cases all the way down to how sexual exploitation and grooming will lead into trafficking cases. We're one of the local agencies that will be around for ops when there is a local operation. And right now we operate 4 safe houses for survivors of sex trafficking in the greater Charlotte area. So we run a 6 to 12 month residential transitional program. So we had 0 houses 3 years ago, recognized the need for housing was increasing so significantly. Took a ridiculous leap of faith, opened our first house 3 years ago, and now we have 4, and we're on track to have our 5th before the end of the year, all so that we can house survivors. And in our program, survivors will, to a lot of what George was saying, these are remarkable people, absolutely remarkable people who they need the support of the community. So while they're with us, they're going to have everything from all of their counseling, their therapies, all of their physical and medical needs, taken care of with a case manager or multiple case managers. They're going to be in our houses getting job placement training. One of the biggest issues we run into is our survivors are remarkable, but as George was saying, they have a record or they have gaps in their resume. So we find ways to train them specifically for jobs that they can do that are non-forward facing, that they would feel comfortable doing. And we rely heavily, very, very heavily on the local community and the local church in order to come around, rally around our survivors in our safe houses. Everything from obviously the usual stuff, people can donate and all of that, but we need people to come through our trainings and get equipped and background check and all of that stuff, and then take our survivors for a coffee. We need people that will, write encouraging notes for our survivors. So on the days that they're feeling down, we can hand them a note and just say, hey, this person, has been praying for you. And so it's been a remarkable journey over the last 15 years. I have a tech background. My wife calls me a nerd with a nonprofit. Essentially, that's what I am. When we felt called to start this work, we knew we had to jump into it wholeheartedly. And we knew once we started it, we would do it for the rest of our lives, just because once you start to see how the darkness is permeating our communities, we're based in Cabarrus County. I love my town. I love my county. And I start to see it everywhere now. I'm starting to see it pop up in places I never expected. We knew at that point that this was going to be our fight till the day we die. And so having people like you guys show up and even just, give support and encouragement, it means the world to all of our agencies. This can be a lonely battle. So I encourage you guys, it doesn't have to be the Lantern, but find an agency that is doing this work and doing it well, and come alongside them, support them, just encourage them, because we all need it. So that being said, we're talking big picture, we're talking legislature, we're talking law enforcement. What we're going to do now is kind of boil it down to a little bit more to what this looks like for our region, what this may look like for your kids if you're a parent or your family members. And one of the biggest things, as Tammy was saying, is as a tech guy, I've been trying to sound the alarm about the dangers of technology for 10 years. And now we've reached the point that we are so far behind the ball that every bit of technology is now flooded with predators that are actively seeking children. Now, that's not an exaggeration. I think some of the most recent data from the Center for Missing and Exploited Children says that a predator now can form a lasting bond with a child in less than 8 minutes. So, those of you that have children in particular, if you can imagine your child walking away with an iPad, and they can be gone for an hour. And oftentimes we don't know what they're doing. We don't know who they're talking to. And because as a society, we've been oversharing all of our data for so long through social media. Now these predators, they have this table laid out before them where they can access data on your family, your child's hobbies, their siblings, and they can start interactions very, very easily. One of the horrible things that I have to do is read these transcripts, from cases where these children are talking to predators. And I wish I could say that these kids were difficult for these predators to groom, but honestly, they're not. And so, what we're doing now is we're kind of really shifting gears. We obviously, our safe houses are up and running and everything that we're doing with law enforcement, but we're really trying now to focus back on our community. We firmly believe that as a society, we were designed to be more, what we would say, tribal rather than global. We were designed to be more connected as a community and supporting one another. We had generations living together. We had friends looking after our kids. Our kids would play together with the neighbors. That's all changed, essentially since the development of smartphone technology, primarily the iPhone. And so what we're trying to do now is just tell you guys the importance of understanding the technological element when it comes to keeping your families, your friends safe online. And if you don't have kids, you can still be an advocate for protecting children. That's important to recognize. This isn't just if you're a parent, or, we speak more now to grandparents than ever because in the current climate, grandparents are watching their kids a lot more and they have real concerns about what their kids are accessing online and things like that. And so essentially what we tell people at this point is the internet is the Wild West. There is no safe internet at this point. Anything that has a chat feature has been weaponized. And we say the very first thing that we would encourage everyone to do is delay technology as long as possible. And I know that's a difficult thing to say to people. And I know a lot of people will just be like, I need my 10 minutes of peace. So I give them a phone, or I need whatever. And that's absolutely understandable. I never condemn parents for having a crazy life. I'm a dad. I have 2 young kids. They keep me on my toes. But the problem is that now these devices are getting increasingly difficult to secure. And we have what we call a knowledge gap forming between parents and caregivers and children and their technology. So you have a kid now getting on average an iPhone when they're about 9 years old. By the time they're 16, 17, they're up to about 12 hours in a 24-hour period in front of a screen. And so aside from the physical component and the psychological component of being in front of a screen that long, the chances of them encountering a predator are increasing significantly. As Tammy mentioned, 750,000 predators. And that's not just, that's unique IPs. Those are unique predators actively pursuing children at any given point online. And the average age they're looking for now is about 12 to 14. That is the demographic that they're going after. And that's what we're seeing more so in the schools now. When we go into the schools and we share with the kids, and we're talking with the kids about digital safety and internet permanence, the fact that when they post something, it remains there forever, even if they think it's deleted, like a Snapchat or something, people can still access it. We're in a very unique place in our society where the technological element has completely overwhelmed the familial element. And I don't want to go full-blown nerd and start talking about AI and the advances in AI and what we're going to be looking at in the next couple of years, because honestly, the AI component scares me and I use it every day. But what we're seeing significantly now is young kids. I think 88% now of trafficking cases are originating on a social media platform. One of the cases that we had a couple of years ago actually started within a school app. It was an app designed for the kids in the school to see all of the things. The predator infiltrated it, moved that child over to Discord, which, if I have to have a dirty dozen of apps, Discord is up there. It's one of those apps I encourage people, like, hey, just delete it. Delete it. It doesn't need to be on your kid's phone. And the reason for that is Discord is very good for predators because it allows them to communicate, it allows them to get all the information they need, share images, coerce images. And then when it comes to the time that they may be discovered, it allows them to delete their trail completely. They're operating on a private server. So under the guise of being a gaming app, Discord has become one of the most active predator locations on your kid's phone. So, if I had to tell you today, I was called the other day the most hated person by teenagers in North Carolina. It's a badge I wear proudly because I tell parents, don't negotiate with certain things. And the things I say don't negotiate with are Snapchat and Discord. They are there's nothing good or nothing redeeming about them. I tell parents, delete them. So the whole technological element is really big. And I want to make sure that I talk to you guys about how this happens. We've talked about, obviously, this isn't the white van situation that we all think of, right? It's not something that's scary like that. But I mean, that does happen in other locations. My wife and I were missionaries in Europe, and we did encounter that stuff. We did encounter red light districts where people were being forced to dance in windows and things like that. It looks different all over the world, but what you're going to see for the most part is going to be a digital gateway into your household. It's going to be your child starting to talk to someone on Minecraft or Roblox, anything with a chat feature, which, again, by the way, Roblox was just named a predator hellscape in one of the most recent studies because it has millions and millions of user-generated games, and your kids can walk into horrific things. We actually just sent out an email about that, and at the end, if you guys want to communicate, I can get you guys the email about specifically the Roblox and the digital safety component. But anything with a chat feature has become an open portal into your home, and parents just do not realize it at this point. And we now have Spotify Messenger is becoming a big problem that we're facing. Most parents don't even know now that Spotify has a messaging program within it now. We had cases last year of digital grooming taking place on the Bible app before the Bible app locked it down. So all of this, it's just words and data, and very quickly overwhelming for parents when they realize, how do I actually control all of this? My kid is completely wired into this digital world. And the reality is it starts with sitting down and talking about this issue. As the other speaker said, we need to remove the false information and we need to remove the stigma around this stuff. Your kids need to hear about this stuff from you. If you're someone who understands this, then talk in great depth, obviously, but your kids need to understand that you are so concerned about their health and well-being that you're willing to sit and have these difficult conversations about tech. And I encourage you, we have conversation starters on our website if you struggle with that kind of thing, on how to talk about digital safety or how to talk about your kids' online life. But it is vitally important because these predators are sneaking in under the radar. And as I was saying, the one case that we were dealing with, he moved her over to Discord. Honestly, one of the hardest cases for me, only because they were family friends of ours. And I answered the call to the dad, and he was literally just weeping on the other line. And he asked me if I could come over. Basically, I'm looking through these Discord transcripts because they hadn't been deleted yet, screenshotting everything. And this innocent young girl had gone from just a very, very sweet, polite young girl to just, her language was filthy. She was sending images. And by the time we intervened, she was planning on meeting this predator in Florida, who turned out to be a 30-year-old male in Florida, and she was 11 at the time this took place. All of this happened at night, behind a closed door, on an internet-ready device. So that's three things we say right away. It's like, no internet-ready devices out of sight, none of them in the bedrooms in our household. Our kids aren't even allowed to take an electronic device in the bathroom. It's like, read the air freshener. That's what I used to do in the 80s. You're not taking devices out of my sight. And at night, especially, tech needs to be put away. We need to make sure that we're not giving our kids unlimited access to tech. Now, all of this is a lot of information from tonight. And I know by this point, your brain is probably reeling. So I would encourage you I know you're going to get access to all of this stuff. I would say take time to do research. We have a class that we teach called Empowered Parenting, specifically for parents. When we remind you of your role as a parent, because it's very easy to forget. The school doesn't get to dictate what devices your kid has to have or what social media platforms they need to be on. You guys get to choose that. You guys get to moderate that. You have to have the capacity to say no. You have to have rules in place regarding technology, because if we don't, we're at the point right now with the advances in AI, then our kids are not going to be able to tell what's real and what's not online if we don't train them to have critical thinking. And that comes from being outside of the echo chamber of their online world. That comes from them having talks with other kids and other adults and being plugged into their community. I tell my kids all the time, no devices, go touch grass. Like, nature's amazing. Get outside, because we have to create that separation. We want our kids to be tech savvy. We want them to have great lives. We want them to be able to utilize AI. What we don't want is for them to be so entrenched in a digital world that they cannot tell reality from fiction anymore. And that is where the predators are stepping in to reach these kids. And so, any of the major gaming systems, make sure they're secure, friends only. Don't let your kids vanish behind a door with a headset on, because I promise you, they are talking to people on games like Fortnite or Call of Duty way, way, way worse than you would want them talking to. They're hearing things they're not supposed to hear. So on our website, we literally have a list on our resource section of every single device and how to secure it. So if you're just like, how do I secure a Chromebook? We have a breakdown on there. How do I secure an iPad? It takes virtually no time to do this stuff. It's very, very easy. We also have a list of software and hardware. I know Representative asked me for some stuff, and then he sent
when
me a
you were
picture of the
upstairs, I said, go downstairs and watch TV.
The representative asked for a router. I sent him a router. He sent me a picture of the router I recommended. So now he can. Someone's getting in trouble. He sent me a picture of the router that he bought, and that's going to allow him to monitor the traffic in his household. He's going to be able to block sites directly from his router. So all of these tools are available, as we're coming to a close. And there's obviously a lot of stuff to do if you want to start at home, but connect with your local agencies, talk to your local law enforcement, talk to your representatives, go to our website if you need help. It's just thelantern.net. Very, very easy URL. Our agency is local. We're here. We travel. We speak. We do trainings. If you ever want to volunteer locally, there's a fair amount of training involved. But we want people to plug in, because honestly, we want this region. We serve all of the Carolinas. But, as Tammy was saying, this is a different time for anyone that's been involved in the fight against trafficking for any length of time. Like we have, we're seeing things change for the first time. We're seeing the community say, not in our backyard, not our kids, not in our community. We refuse it. We reject it. And because of that, we're gaining momentum. So a horrific trafficking tidal wave that we've been facing for the first time, I'm actually starting to see be stemmed by the local community. And that is very much the heart of the Lantern Project and the other people on this call, is to see this stopped. We want to start it right here in our community, and we want to see it spread all across these United States. So please, if you have questions, reach out. Stay engaged in this. Don't let this be something where you turn off your laptop and then forget everything that we've said, because I don't want any more kids in my safe house. I don't want to see any of your families, having to reach out to me because of something that happened. So if you can prevent it and we can help, we will absolutely do that. And again, thank you so much for being here. That alone shows your commitment to this fight. I greatly appreciate all of you. And I really hope I get to connect with some more of you soon.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. I have some questions here. I'm bringing in everyone to moderate. I'm going to moderate some of the questions, and that way you guys can answer them. I have a question, something that wasn't addressed, and this is my question. I know my wife also has a question here. Obviously, Simon, we spent a couple hours together, and you told me about a Griffin router. And so we acted upon it. We had the means to act upon it, and we did. You told me it would be a little slower. and we're getting used to it because it has to filter everything. My kids are like, what's going on here? Right? But you know, my wife and I, we've always done what was in our knowledge to protect our children. We have two older boys now, so 18 and 16. And when I think of human trafficking, my initial thought, obviously, is a young girl, okay? You know, while in Dallas, I heard stories about women in their 50s being trafficked. So it's not just a young girl. So perspective, my lens has began to change. But would you, one of the three of you, please address young men in this issue?
I think for me, I saw probably in the last 2 or 3 years a massive increase in young men being extorted for money for pictures. And then I think one thing I also unfortunately saw was the suicide rate among those young men seemed to really skyrocket, because what happens is they start trading photos with someone that they believe is a young lady, a girl at, in another school on the other side of the state or somewhere else. And so they send these photos, and then all of a sudden it's or someone saying, look, if you don't send me X amount of dollars, I'm going to share this with all your friends. And you've told me where you go to school and all these things. And I work cases where kids started stealing from their parents. They were stealing from their credit cards and going on Venmo and PayPal and sending money. And it got to the point to where there wasn't anything left to steal, and they were afraid these pictures were going to come out. And we hear stories across the United States where even boys and girls in this situation start taking their lives, unfortunately. And so I think, like someone was saying, that's why it's so important to be the parent. You're going to have to be hard with your children. You're going to have uncomfortable conversations, and you're talking about a router. I encourage parents, get routers that have apps to where you can see every single device on there. You can cut off the access to that device at 8 o'clock at night, whether your kid gives you access to that device or not. Because I hear so many times in law enforcement, I can't control my kid. I don't know they have her. They won't give it to me, and I don't want to have to fight them for it. Well, okay, log on to the app and cut off the internet to it. Deny access at the router to that device. And at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock in the morning, you can log on to your app and you can hit your button and give that device access again. Very simple way. There's no arguing. There's no fussing. I'm not saying it's the perfect way, but it is a solution to a problem. But at some point, we have to start shifting this narrative and allowing parents to be parents again. Because I think, unfortunately, we kind of got away from parents being parents and children being the parents sometimes. And you have to have those hard conversations, because like Simon said, if you're not having that conversation, someone else is. So it's better for you to control that narrative and plant those seeds than someone else.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah, I'd like to just tag on to that we're seeing, to your point, boys, because boys are getting access to porn at the average age of 8 years old. These young boys are watching this thinking it's normal, and then they're doing porn things to other boys. And then so you've got little boys raping each other at the ages between 8 and 11. We've never really seen that as a society before. And then because they think it's normal, and they statistically, because they've had sexual abuse, then they're much higher likelihood of them being groomed, whether in the classroom or in environments like youth group or in sports. So it's this progression that we don't really understand. And so that happening then isolates them. There's that shame involved. And I think what's happening, at least in our family, is that as foster parents, is that boys don't, it's embarrassing. For some reason, there's this more intense level of judgment or shame or social stigma about sexual assault to children, to boys, that they don't talk about it. So I think it's important and imperative that collectively we address that this is a male and female issue, that we have safe houses for males and females, and that we start really addressing this nationally, because this is right now in Texas and across this nation an epidemic.
Yes. I have a question here from a teacher. It says, as a teacher, how can I make a direct impact with the students within my classroom, or how should I be active and bring this to a school board?
Oh, that's a juicy question. So if you're talking about specifically the sexual misconduct complaints that were against teachers, that issue was specifically when teachers were not reporting other teachers. We as a society have done a really good job of educating teachers to turn in family members. If they think a spouse, if they think a parent is harming a child, they call CPS within 24, 48 hours, depending on what your family code is in your state. But when it comes to teachers, understanding that there is inappropriate behavior with students of other teachers, in Texas, they were reporting up to superintendents, not out to law enforcement. One of the things that I would encourage you as a teacher is what is that particular ISD's rules on reporting? Because we had to look at not only the fact of who was getting these complaints, but what was the reporting protocol. And in Texas, if you're a teacher and it was a parent, they reported immediately within 24 to 48. If it was another teacher, that superintendent had 7 days to report.
Wow.
But that was to report to the Texas Education Agency, not to law enforcement. Because in Texas, a lot of our schools have their own law enforcement. They have their own police forces inside of the school. So the superintendent would tell the local ISD police, and they would investigate. And for our law enforcement friends on the call tonight, we know that that's problematic, because if you're investigating your friends, your teachers, or what if that student that has the complaint against is problematic, like my niece was, then they'd be like, oh, well, that's just Dakota. So we want to make sure, I implore you, what is the reporting structure of sexual misconduct complaints with teachers and children? Full stop. Look into that. And that could be something as easy for you to send an email to your superintendent. I'm sure it's outlined in your employment manual, but that's how we have to unpack this particular crime with teachers grooming children. And in Texas, we've had like 233 different teachers in the last year be arrested. Now, those 233 teachers who were arrested for sexual misconduct, only 4 of them were on that list of the 6,888. So it's a problem. So I would encourage you to do that. And if you want specific flow of information, if you're having a hard time finding it, some states cover up where only legislators can do a public information request. If you want to know in your state how many sexual misconduct complaints against teachers, and you do a PIR and it doesn't go anywhere, like we're having that problem in Tennessee right now, legislators, as you know, they have a special avenue, and they're able to make those kind of requests. And I believe there's a representative on the call tonight that'd be happy to do that.
I am working on that. I want to, you mentioned something about the teachers and how they have 7 days to report. One of the things I discovered, and I'm so grateful, Simon, you talked about the number of people who attend. This year we have over 300 people who attend. Now, the problem is this email went out to 40,000 people repeatedly. That's less than a 1% response, with different titles to emails that said things like protect your children, protect our children, stop human trafficking. Certainly, if I would have sent out some sort of sweepstakes, we would have had a higher response. So I'm encouraged and grateful and discouraged at the disinterest that you guys have already encountered on the issue. But the phenomena that I have discovered, Tammy, that you mentioned, is the first rule of government is to protect the government. And if you don't know where that comes from, that actually comes from the mafia. So we have this thing where the government constantly protects the government. And listen, you have a heaven and you have a hell. North Carolina, from the local planning and zoning to the governor's mansion, is corrupt as hell, not honoring of heaven. It's a terrible situation. I know we have people here from other states. It's likely the same in those states. So it's like she said, why would they produce layers of information, layers to protect you from the information about teachers, but they will call DSS and the sheriff on you within 24 to 48 hours as an obligation. So that's one of the things to really consider. I have another question here. I think, Simon, you're going to be the one for this. Says, what questions should we ask our schools, our children's schools that use computers, computer programs to assess or teach them? Should we be concerned about these programs? So number one, I want to just follow up what Simon said. We're going to send all of this out. You're going to get an email with all of their contact information, a summary of this. So you're going to have access to them. So that's going to be good. But Simon, would you please address that?
Yeah. So, we tell parents with all of this stuff, again, you are the parent. And that's something that, even in the school system, it almost seems like, oh well, they're the teacher, therefore they have authority. That is not the case. You are the parent, you have authority. So you need to have a detailed list of everything that is going on with any device. When will my child be using this device? When will it be put away? What kind of firewall system is there? What will they have access to? What chats will they be using and things like that? Because if you don't have that information, then your child can just quite easily sit there and say, well, this is a school thing. I have to be doing this, or I have to be, sharing this Google Doc with all of these people. And it's really just a way for them to communicate, which may be innocent, but again, you never know. So you definitely have the capacity to ask what safeguards are being put in place. I met with a parent last night who said, I caved and got my kid a Facebook page when they were 14 because the school kept telling me that they were going to miss out on everything if I didn't get them the Facebook page. And that's how, and I was like, well, that's not the school's prerogative. You have to tell them, my child will not have social media at a young age. I require an email notification of all of this stuff to myself and my child if they have their own email account. Again, it's kind of repositioning ourselves in society as we are the caretakers of our children. We entrust teachers. We want teachers to do a good job, but ultimately, the buck's going to stop at us because our teachers aren't going to show up when our kids start derailing. We are the ones who have to deal with that. So we have the preventative component, and we have complete capacity to ask questions about everything, detailed lists, and require it before you let your child access any school devices.
Absolutely. And Simon, I have a follow-up for you. It says, I wonder what Simon thinks about the peer support model that's growing in North Carolina to help victims get mental health treatment for PTSD, depression, etc., so that they don't fall victim again.
So that's actually a really huge thing. It's growing right now. So we have a lot of, in our region, we do have a lot of advocacy groups forming and things like that. So it has been, honestly, again, just, to boast on our county, there's a lot of stuff going wrong in Mecklenburg and in Cabarrus and things like that. But we do have these key people rising up. We've had so many therapists come forward and say, we'll do therapy for this client pro bono, or we'll assist with in-depth whatever, or people in the medical community. So if we can all collaborate in this capacity, our goal is to not have these survivors in our safe houses indefinitely. We want them to graduate into a supportive, loving community. And we actually just graduated a family 2 weeks ago, a mom and her kids, and she has a job. She's plugged into a church. She has a network of now trusted friends and family around her. It's phenomenal, but that we couldn't do that as an agency alone. We need the community. So the peer support component, other agencies stepping in, offering resources and collaborating, absolutely vital if we're going to see this change in the long term.
Okay, Simon, so what I want to do, we want to take about 6 more minutes. So if each of you, because there's a lot of questions on here, and I know they're going to be contacting you guys directly, seeing how they can get involved. And I'm sure from the questions, a lot of people are concerned with their own children, which I think that's where the concern starts. Definitely the technology side, the teacher side just creeped everybody out. And obviously it's good to know that law enforcement is doing what it needs to do. Somebody asked, and I think this is important because it could lead directly to someone's safety. It says, what measures are in place to prevent the perpetrator from locating the victim at a facility?
And I mean, I'm sure others can speak to this as well, but for us, no one comes into our program until they've gone through all of their evals and everything. And then from there, it's essentially our intake is lengthy, and no devices come into our houses that have been previously owned by anyone. Any car, we have a network of PIs we work with that, if a car is low jacked or something like that. So we're very, very, like, our houses, nothing is in our agency name. No one knows where they are. We are very, very selective about who has access. Mostly it's just key players in law enforcement. And at that point, we haven't had, like I said, we operate 4 houses right now. We haven't had any issues with these houses being compromised. Everyone who's there is honestly so thankful and doing so well that at this point, I know they wouldn't do anything to jeopardize it. But we consult with law enforcement, the DA's office, and those guys very regularly about security procedures. And yeah, so far the Lord's kept us hidden.
Excellent. Excellent. George, Tammy?
Well-
I would say that with the situation with my niece specifically, when it talks about her security and her safety, when we finally found her and recovered her, it took the need to have more houses of what Simon is providing is huge. We had 56 safe houses tell us no before the 57th said yes. Because so often, and in our case and across the board, my niece did not understand that she was being trafficked. My niece did not understand that being sold by the father of her children for drugs was not a normal occurrence. She didn't understand that my husband has never once sold me for any reason at all. So there's a disconnect in their minds because that's just what they've been led to believe is normal. And so when we're looking at safe houses and when we're looking at the disposition of those individuals, lots of safe houses charge people to be there. And so to find the right care and understanding that there's great organizations such as Simon's that make sure that the intake is really, really rigorous, I applaud you. Because as hard as it is to get a family member into a safe house, there are so few beds available where, as I said, I had to make 56 different calls in hoping and praying that my niece would have a bed in a place that would take care of her. And so I think it's really, really important that we collectively do our due diligence together. And I kind of failed to mention that JBM is actually, we do work in all 50 states. So if you're in another state and you want to understand how maybe we can help you legislatively or policy wise, please feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to share everything that we've learned. There's no pride of ownership. We just want to make sure that we can stop this. We believe at JBM that we need to save children before they need rescue. And
Yes.
to do that, it does take all of them.
And George, as you close us out, would you also, there was a question, I just shared it. What are signs of human trafficking that ordinary citizens could look out for? Obviously, you're law enforcement. Go ahead and drop that on us. I'll make sure everybody gets everyone's information so that we don't know what we can do here. Before you answer that, I think they answered your question. The Bible app has been secured already?
Okay.
Okay. My wife wanted to know about the Bible app.
Yeah, they closed that loophole, but it was the second they realized it was open. People they jumped on it, but a lot was happening. You know, you can share scripture verses with the little images, and you can write your own text on there. So people were sharing pornographic images and putting contact information and stuff on as the scripture verse and posting that. But to the Bible app's credit, as soon as they saw it happening, they locked it down.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Excellent. Go ahead and take us home, George. I appreciate you.
So I think that's a great question because when I talk to people, they tell me all the time, like, I don't know what to look for. And this is what I'll tell people. You know, if you're a parent or grandparent, or even if you just, watch your neighbor's children and stuff, you start to understand what's healthy and what's not healthy, what's normal, what's not normal. Don't hesitate to call. If you're in Walmart and you see something that really catches your eye, I have people come up to me all the time after trainings. And they're like, man, I think I saw that the other month. My first question is, why didn't you call? And then they're like, well, I didn't know what to say. It's okay not to know what to say. And it's okay to call and say, hey, I see something that just doesn't sit right with me. And this is what I tell people when I was on patrol. Officers get paid to be there for 12 hours, whether they're answering your call, riding around, doing a wreck or eating dinner or whatever. That's what they're paid for. Don't hesitate to pick up the phone, call and say something doesn't seem right. I would rather people call and say, I'm not comfortable with what I'm looking at. I see a child that seems to not be with a parent and they're being forced to walk this or something like that. And let officers come out. I'd rather it be nothing than you say nothing and it be something. Don't ever hesitate. And it's the same thing I see with younger officers. They'll come up to me and say, hey, I saw something that was really caught my eye. And then why is it not in the report? Well, I didn't know how to articulate it. Just let people know what you're looking at. Let people know what your gut is telling you. I tell people all the time, our gut is a great indicator of so many different things. Unfortunately, we just don't listen to it often enough because we're afraid of making people mad. We're afraid of being embarrassed. We're afraid of all these different things. Don't be afraid to help that child. Don't be afraid to help that person. You don't understand the true difference that you can make with a simple telephone call, with a simple, even sometimes you can text tips in, just like the teacher who took the chance and knew that she didn't see something exactly right with the student we were dealing with. She took a chance. She could have been wrong and she could have been embarrassed or whatever, but she was right. And she took the opportunity to say something about something that made her very uncomfortable. So I just challenge all of you, keep your eyes open, look around your community, look around, and sometimes you have to look at places where you're not comfortable looking. Look around church, look around at your friends' homes, look at places that you think are safe havens, because sometimes the safe havens are unfortunately the places that people take advantage of that safety net that we believe should be there. If you see your child has your a teacher's cell phone number, I was an SRO. I coached multiple sports. I promise you, not a single one of my students had my personal cell phone number.
Yes.
Not a single one ever got in touch with me through a social media app, nor would I ever allow it. And trust me, a couple of them found me on Facebook and tried to friend me, and I ended it very quickly. So just ask questions, even within your home. Don't be afraid. Like, Simon and Tammy and everyone was saying, be the parent. And
Yes.
unfortunately, sometimes that means you have to do hard things that are going to cause some uncomfortable conversations, and that's okay. If we had more people sometimes who were willing to do that, we wouldn't be having this conversation as often.
Well, listen, you guys are amazing. The next step for us, you three, is we're working on a local meeting in conjunction with some organizations here in Cabarrus County. We want to do a local in-person meeting, and we're just going to keep taking whatever step is next and hoping for good results, hoping for good legislation and brave legislators and community members. With that, just a big fat thank you. I'll be sure to speak with you guys tomorrow, get all the information that I can send out in one email so people can get in contact with you, your websites, everything else. And let's just do what we need to do. Not just pray. Prayer leads to action. I appreciate you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good night.